Hello, Coach Magazine Global readers and YouTube channel viewers. Today, my guest is Mia O'Gorman, and I'm going to introduce her a little bit. She is an executive coach, coaching supervisor, leadership development consultant, and trainer of coaches and supervisors. Her passion is people development. She works through collaborative partnerships and enjoys working across multiple projects on a freelance basis. She worked with many great leaders and organizations, including AstraZeneca, Deloitte, McKinsey, Watson Marlowe, Fluid Technology Group, and many others. She has previously volunteered as a well-being coach for Macmillan Cancer Support, providing coaching to people living with cancer, and currently volunteers as an accreditation mentor for the EMCC, enabling coaches to evidence their experience and capability to gain the professional recognition of EMCC accreditation, as well as co-chair of EMCC, UK's new special interest group in coaching supervision. Welcome to Coach Magazine Global's 5 o'clock Tea Talk number 10, Mia O'Gorman. How are you today?
Thank you, Seda. I'm really well. Quite hot today here in the UK. We're having a mini heat wave.
Yes, it is very hot here too, as well as I'm in London, and we are starting 3 times today. We had a little bit technological misunderstanding and updates, but we are here finally. Few minutes late, 5 minutes late. It's okay. So, I would like to start with my first question, Via. Could you please share the story of how you first discovered coaching as a career path and what inspired you to transition from your role in corporate HR to become a coach?
Sure. So I think I was very lucky to discover coaching, or it discovered me early on in my career. So I was in my second organisation as an HR consultant with one of the big UK banks. And this would have been about 2002 or 3, perhaps. And we had a short, informal training session run by one of our leadership development partners for the regional HR team that I worked in at the time. And it included the skills of listening and questioning and a really short introduction to the GROW model. And it was just like something clicked. That just seemed to me the most, natural and just right way of working with people, to put the person who you are working with, whether you're consulting, developing them, whatever the role was, but to put them and their needs and interests first. So I guess it just suited my personality, suited my outlook on life. And what that led to was then using those skills within my HR consulting role. But about 6 months later, I was seconded to a central learning and development team. And while I was there, the business made the decision to roll out a coaching culture training program to about 2,000 managers in the bank retail branch network. So, of course, I volunteered to get involved with this and was lucky to be one of about 20 people to have trained the trainer training from John Whitmore's organisation, Performance Consultants. So, of course, many coaches listening will know that John Whitmore really popularised the GROW model into the world of business coaching from the world of sport. So, of course, the quality of that train the trainer experience was excellent. And then I got to spend quite a lot of the rest of that year delivering a 2-day coach training program to managers at different levels throughout the bank. And because I was in that central learning and development team, I also got to be involved in the evaluation of the impact of that program. So I really saw how it made a difference to individuals, to teams and the branches. And we did feel like we shifted the dial on the organisational culture, and that was shown in things like our engagement survey. So that, not just the initial training itself, but that whole experience across, probably 6 to 12 months, just really sparked a professional passion in me. From then, I spent about another maybe 6 or 7 years in in-house roles in leadership development and in talent management and succession planning, but always trying to do as much internal coaching as possible. By which time I realised I was project managing people's development more than I was a practitioner of people development. So I transitioned to external consultancy and started to have then more and more opportunities for coaching to be a significant part of my role. I upped that again around 6 years ago by becoming freelance. So now most of my time is spent coaching or supervising or training coaches, and I've really now been able to put coaching at the centre of what I do.
Yeah, so you both seen the internal part of coaching and as a consultant, the external part of the coaching. So
Mm.
how do you think these key differences between internal and external coaching? How do these roles shape your coaching approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, in many ways, the coaching itself could be pretty much the same, whether you're an internal coach or an external coach. But what's different is your place within the system. So, as an internal coach, you're within that organization, you know the culture, you've got multiple relationships with potentially different coachees, the different line managers of the coachees, maybe you know the team members of the people that you're coaching. And you've got that network of connections. And that's a double edged sword. So it can give you lots of insight, and you'll know more about what your coachee is likely working with. However, depending on your role in that organisation, you know, perhaps you are very commonly internal coaches, a part of the HR function. So then how does that sit with your coaching clients? How easy is it for them to fully trust you or to not feel that somehow information shared in coaching might show up in some other organisational process? So it's not to say that always happens, and you know, especially now, there's much more awareness of supervision, and particularly supervision for internal coaches is an emerging specialism within coaching supervision, even. So I think that can support coaches to be as clean as possible in those relationships. But I think the kind of double-edged sword of both knowing more about the organisation and the other people involved as an advantage and perhaps as a disadvantage is the difference. Now, of course, if you're an external coach, you are starting from being outside of that wider organisational system. However, the more work you do within it, the closer you get, perhaps emotionally as well as in terms of your knowledge. And so you might find yourself drawn into that system in a number of different ways, and equally having to make sure that you're very alert to conflicts of interest. Again, kind of coming as an outsider can sometimes be an advantage because you can maybe ask questions that somebody inside the organisation couldn't ask. You might not make the same assumptions about what isn't possible. But then, of course, your lack of cultural knowledge of that organisation or context, at least to start with, you're going to have to grow that and use a lot of business empathy to build those bridges. And that dynamic will shift and change over time.
Yeah, they both seems like have leverages and disadvantages. Yeah, it's kind of being on the way you get professional and professional. You see more connections between the companies, even though they have different cultures. They
Mm.
might have similarities in a way. You know, you might pick up from them and oh, okay, I need this, and let's go
Yeah.
with this. That kind of so yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
absolutely. So I think you're kind of afforded, you know, it's not that an internal or an external coach is necessarily more credible or more skilled than another, but probably people within the organisation are making different assumptions about you, or
Yeah.
imagining different things about what you bring into the space based on those. Certainly, in some organisations, it's quite a hierarchical approach, so it's very typical for external coaches to be utilised to coach more senior leaders, for example, and internal coaches to be utilised to coach further down the organisation. Again, not universally, but yeah, that these kind of things can show up within the work.
Takes me to my third question. You know, we've been through a pandemic, COVID-19, and it
Mhm.
brought unique challenges for everyone and for the leaders. And you're an executive coach and a supervisor. Could you share your insights into what leaders went through during this crisis? Additionally, how did your role as a supervisor evolve or adapt during this challenging period?
Sure. So if I start with what leaders went through, what I observed was, I think the widest lived example of the acronym VUCA. So this stands for a world which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think what was particularly striking about the COVID pandemic was that leaders were going through all of that turmoil at the same time as their employees. If you think about other kinds of disruptions in organizations, something like a merger and acquisition or a significant change of strategy or a restructure, anything like that, ordinarily the leaders have had an opportunity to come to terms with that, and start to be planned in be involved in the planning and the implementation of it before it's rolled out to the organisation at large. Whereas with COVID, everybody was thrust into it together. So there was a certain amount, I guess, of collegiate feeling in that, and people perhaps being, very energised to do what felt right. But it also, yeah, led to, I just think a great deal of physical stress, emotional stress, huge amounts of uncertainty. So that real need for individual and collective resilience and agility. So the VUCA acronym, I think, has become quite well known in that form to describe an environment, that's volatile, there's extreme changes, that's uncertain, that's hard to predict, that's complex, and that's ambiguous. It's difficult to read the data, read the signs. But then there's also a kind of antidote to VUCA. And I think this is slightly less well known, but this was the kind of thing I would often be working with my coachees around to help them lead effectively in that situation. So to respond to a VUCA environment, leaders will need to be more visionary, they will need to be more understanding, they will need to be able to be creative, and they need to be able to be agile. So, to be working with people and for example, around something like, how do I overcome uncertainty? It might be that the only thing a leader can do is say to their team, this is the plan for the next 7 days, and I'll update you at 7 days. If that leader then honours that commitment and provides the next update when they've said they will, they've created a tiny piece of certainty in an uncertain environment. So just things like following through on those commitments, being able to reassess, to pivot. That's what agility is all about, having some kind of a vision. So I think that was one dimension of it. I think another dimension, and this goes back, I'm showing my age a bit here, to a model that's been around a long, long time, but one of Stephen Covey's models, this is in his book, Principle-Centered Leadership, is around leading from the inside out. So the principle being that you have to be able to lead yourself effectively before you can lead effectively in one-to-one relationships or in teams or the wider organisation. So I think what leaders faced into during the COVID pandemic, perhaps more than ever, was a need to lead from the inside out, to be able to take care of themselves, their immediate well-being, have some kind of revised routine for their family. And once those cornerstones were in place, then you're taking care of your own needs well enough to be an effective leader for others. And I think some people were so concerned initially outward that it was very easy to neglect their own well-being and needs in striving to execute their leadership roles.
Yeah.
And the second part of your question was then, how did my role as a supervisor shift? And I think that was along similar lines. Supervision is there to help coaches be effective. So a broader question would be, who helps the helpers? Well, for coaches who are helping leaders, their form of help is supervision. So I definitely saw a shift during COVID times into much more of working in the restorative function of supervision, the purpose of which is to help coaches process their own feelings and emotions, not just towards the work, but of course they were going through all of the turmoil, the same as everybody else. So sometimes it became less about client casework or tackling challenges within the coaching itself than about just being a safe space where those helpers could also get help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Who is helping the helpers? It was a very challenging era. It seems like far away, but it was so close. We seem to turn back to our normal lives, but it's never the same before the COVID. It's like this challenging times taught a lot to everybody probably. And I watched this movie called Lockdown yesterday, and it was talking about all this, companies, leaders, how they have to let go of the employers,
Mm.
emerge of the companies, but they are blaming the COVID to let go of the employers. All these kind of things. It was an amazing movie about this thing. Should watch also.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we don't know yet what the long term outcomes for society are. Not of the physical disease of COVID, but of all of that disruption and change. Way back at school, we read the book To Kill a Mockingbird in our English syllabus. And the opening lines of that book are, when enough years have passed to enable us to look back on them. And it starts the story. And I think we're still in that situation. I don't think enough time has passed yet to enable us to look back on and process or fully understand what the COVID times meant in that broadest sense.
I would say at least 20 to 30 years would pass to see the correct outcome of this social change. You're right.
Mm, sure.
I don't know if with the technological agility, the fastness, bring it down to 10 years, but I would say still 20 years because it's a social thing, right? It's about all the population, and it gives a lot of outcomes, and people need to evaluate all these outcomes to serve as a article, or I don't know what research, so we will understand that.
Yeah.
So about the leaders, many leaders undergo 360 leadership profiles to assess their leadership style. How do you believe one's personal philosophy influences their leadership style as reflected in these profiles? Could you provide any examples of how aligning personal philosophies with leadership can lead to more effective outcomes?
Yeah, so this is a really, really interesting question. So I suppose how far a leader's personal philosophy shows up in 360 feedback is going to depend a lot on the structure that the feedback tool is built around. So if the feedback tool is built around, let's say a very standard off the shelf type set of leadership competences, normally the feedback providers are asked to give a numerical rating, perhaps for how frequently they experience a particular behaviour from a leader. In those numerical ratings alone, you're not going to see much of a leader's personal philosophy. Where you might start to see it come through is where free-form comments are enabled at the end. So a common structure for this would be an open text response that asks the feedback providers to say what that leader should stop doing. Then in a second question, what they should start doing or do differently. And then usually finishes with the third most positive question, what should they continue to do, which is aimed at identifying strengths. So those kind of personally written responses usually will give you a lot more flavour of who that leader is and the kind of relationships they build, the impact that they have on their colleagues, perhaps than will come out of the more numerical scored part of the 360 tool. So I think then considering how can leaders align their personal philosophies with their leadership effectiveness, and what difference does that make? I think it can make actually a really big difference, because it will be about authenticity. So if as a leader you are in touch with your values, you've got a sense of purpose, and not just what you want to achieve in terms of the tasks or objectives for the year ahead. What's your real reason for being in the industry sector or in the company that you're in? What are your passions? What difference do you hope to make in the world? And then what do you believe about people and about how people work together in organisations to deliver? So if a leader is in touch with their values, their purpose, their own motivations, then all of those things will show up in their leadership approach. So whether they're a great You could pick a famous example. You could pick somebody like Steve Jobs. He's been in the public eye ever such a lot. And you can see his strengths and development areas on display. There's films made about his life and work as well. Um, so yeah, that's somebody with a very, very different leadership style. If I just pick another person in the tech industry, say to Bill Gates. And you could look at what Bill Gates is doing now with his life and with his foundation and the charitable work, and perhaps say that he's more purpose-driven now than he was in his time at Microsoft. But I don't know him as an individual, so I'm speculating.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you can absolutely draw a thread through to those things, and generally the more effective leaders are the ones that have been able to make a deep connection with purpose, values, and what they want to achieve in the world, and they lead from that place.
Yeah. And also, people's view changes. Like in every 5 years, probably the leader now you're evaluating is believing this and that, have these values, that point of view. But if you come this company in 5 years again, and you will see completely different outcomes. If you make them write a manifestation for 5 years, right? They would say something to see that if they achieve that in 5 years, or do they did something completely different, it's another story. But yeah, everybody has changes during the 5 times, I think, 5 years periods, at least, at most, probably. I'm
Yeah,
not the person 5 years ago. I won't be the person 5 years from now. I think I'm gonna do this kind of job. I'm gonna do coaching until I die, but I might change my feelings and my opinions 5 years later. I might completely change my sector. I have no idea right now. So
yeah.
it's an amazing thing to observe these changes in leaders also.
It is, and there's something for me around how intentional can we be about that change, and are we putting effort into it? So, way further back when I worked in a more recruitment focused role, you might look at somebody's CV and you think, well, has this person really got 10 years experience, or have they got 2 years experience that they've repeated 5 times?
Yeah.
So not everybody will perhaps grow and change at the same rate, and not everybody will be intentional and focused and put effort into their growth and development.
Yeah. So you have an extensive background in training and coaching managers. Could you highlight a particular challenging coaching experience you had and strategies you used to help this manager overcome their obstacles? Of course, without giving the names, you don't have to. You just can talk about some situations that comes to your mind.
Yeah, and I guess it's difficult. I don't tend to think of it as being kind of challenging coaching so much as coachees facing challenging situations. And yeah, certainly there are some of those. So I think, I suppose an example that relates to people's growth and development in the way we were just talking about was working with one individual in a professional services context, who at the time I was engaged to work with them had been passed over in the promotions process for partnership a couple of times, and was feeling really downhearted and disgruntled by this, and had seen their kind of peers go ahead of them. And there were also then some issues around specific behaviours, such as this person would have kind of quite big outbursts of anger and frustration at times. But they also were recognised as having a very high degree of technical skill. And the organisation really wanted to support them, had a brilliant line manager that said, look, we want this person to thrive and be happy. That might be here, in which case let's figure out how they can get to partnership. If that's what they really want, is there a different career path that would be better for them, either in the firm or outside of the firm? And part of the challenge was that this individual was so expert in what they did that several senior leaders in the organisation were basically overloading them with day-to-day work using their specialist discipline. They were never encouraged or given space to develop the skills and capabilities that were looked for in the partner promotion process, such as business development, leading and developing other individuals within the firm. So they were kind of in this double bind. And again, you really see the impact of the system in this, of on the one hand being so valued for what they did that they weren't being allowed to grow in other ways, and then felt they were being kind of hit round the face with it each time the promotions round came. So what it took with that individual was some work to help them kind of see the bind that they were in, really working with them to have some courageous conversations with their own manager and with other managers about the way their work was being dealt with, learning to say no or say, I'll delegate that to somebody else, but I'll oversee it, in order to then create the capacity to start to practice and develop those other skills that they'd kind of fallen behind on. There was lots of deepening of personal awareness. I think then alignment to values. So this individual was naturally very introverted, didn't say themselves as a people person. So quite a lot of the work was thinking about what were going to be the most effective routes for them to build relationships with their clients. Because they were kind of saying, well, I'm just not the kind of person who's going to go on golf days or big drinking sessions or other kind of things. So, they figured out ways that they could do it using their expertise, providing training for people within their client firms, and just, different kinds of events. So it's about finding ways that they could, I suppose, create capacity, create the space, develop the skills that they've been lacking, but do that in a way that was authentic to them. And the end result was that they were successful, and they achieved that promotion that they were looking for.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for this example. And this brings us to our last question.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's fly by, I know. As a freelance accredited coach, trainer for 6 years, you've likely seen the coaching landscape evolve. What emerging trends or shifts in coaching methodologies do you find particularly intriguing or promising for the future of coaching and talent development?
Sure. Okay. So there's kind of two parts to this answer. So the first part is the increasing prevalence of coaching enabled by various forms of technology. So whether that's platform-based coaching that seeks to, on the one hand, democratize coaching and make it more available to more people, which is a laudable aim. But I have real question marks around whether that commoditizes coaching, and the fairness of the pay that reaches down to coaches actually doing that work, and also the quality of service that is provided in that way, and the quality of engagement with client organizations and with individual clients. So what I hear about, I should be open and say I'm not involved in any of that work personally, but what I hear about is really mixed experiences from everybody involved in the process as to whether that's effective or not. So I think you could then look at something like AI as a technology coming in towards coaching and therapy. And I think we may finally get to find out if it is the human factor that makes the most significant difference in coaching, because AI-based coaching is not going to have that. So I would say I think these technological advances are, intriguing, but the jury is out for me personally as to whether those are positive steps or not. The other thing that is an interest area for me and relates back to what we were talking about with development and being intentional about development is the theory around adult development and vertical development in adulthood. So this is whereby the theory or the proposition of this is that as we go from being babies up to fully grown adults, our developmental process is fairly natural and predictable, and most people, given good life chances, will go through the same kinds of evolutions. As adults, that's not the case. We can plateau for long periods of time, but with focus and attention, we may then make certain steps up, and that will each stage tends to result in a more expansive and inclusive worldview. So I think this emerging body of work around vertical development and what that can offer to coaching and to coaching clients to really think about how do they make those transitions, how do they adopt that more expansive worldview that means they will naturally then give more consideration to what the workplace culture is like, our long-term impact on the environment, how are we serving wider society and not just the profits of shareholders. I think that body of theory is a really interesting one and one that I'm looking to learn more about.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, when you talk about from childhood to adulthood, we evolve. I always think as a coach, as a mentor, I wish everyone could communicate with their inner child so they can see more clearly what their real values, strengths, what do they want to say no to. They can, some of them develop this kind of habitual behaviors that they cannot say no anymore, even though while they were child they can say immediately something to, they don't want no. But yeah, exploring this inner child is a very good tool, I think, too. So is there a last message that you would like to give to our audience?
Wow, any last messages for the audience? Well, firstly, thank you. If you've listened all the way to this far in the conversation, and I think you mentioned in my introduction I've recently taken up a role as the co-chair of EMCC UK's coaching supervision special interest group. So I think supervision is establishing itself in coaching, but not all coaches are truly bought into it yet in terms of the value that it adds to you as a person, to you as a coach. So if I had one further message for the audience would be, if you're not already in supervision, please find yourself a supervisor. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's incredibly enjoyable and rewarding thing to do, and it will enhance you and your practice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Mia. Thank you for your time. Thank you for accepting our invitation and come here, talk about your insights, the questions that I am curious about. I'm sure the audience is well informed with these kind of answers of yours. Hope to collaborate in more projects with you. And thank you for the audience for watching us. And please subscribe and follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Coach Magazine Global channel for this kind of different guests, coaches, 5 o'clock tea talks, other blogs and podcasts. Please follow us. Don't forget to click on the bell to be informed from the time that we put a video on. So have a nice day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.